All right, so you've sent us some articles, a bunch of stuff from Reddit about Neuralink's Blindsight device.
Yeah.
And honestly, Elon Musk is, like, really stirring things up again on X.
Yeah, it's gotten a lot of attention, that's for sure.
I mean, the FDA granted Neuralink breakthrough device designation for this, which is huge.
It's a big deal.
In the medical device world. And of course, Musk is already tweeting about it, like restoring sight, even for people who've been blind since birth.
Every few months, it seems like there's something new to talk about with Neuralink.
Yeah, and the reactions in this Reddit thread are all over the place. You've got, like, Kitchen Task 3475 saying, Luddite said this tech was decades away. Progress bros, we stay winning.
It's very easy to get caught up in the hype, yeah.
Totally. But then on the flip side, you've got, like, Against Expectations, already making jokes about Dad Simulator 2042, where your virtual dad, thanks to Neuralink, can still be just as much pain as ever.
Hopefully some things remain constant.
Right. But before we even get too deep into the speculation, can we just, like, break down what we're even talking about here?
Yeah.
Because, like, restoring sight with a brain implant, that just sounds like straight out of a movie.
It really makes you wonder, like, what is possible now?
Yeah.
What's going to be possible?
Yeah. So how does this even work? Like, walk me through this.
To understand Blindsight, I think we kind of have to touch on how Neuralink's brain-computer interface works. Their whole, like, you've probably heard the term BCI being thrown around.
Yeah, it's very sci-fi movie, future stuff.
It's one of those things that, you know, kind of sits in that space between, like, science fiction and reality.
Yeah.
But essentially, it's about creating a direct connection between your brain and a computer.
Okay.
And Neuralink aims to do this by implanting these incredibly tiny electrodes into the brain. And those electrodes can both listen to and stimulate neural activity.
So, like, in theory, I'm just trying to wrap my head around this. So, like, in theory, this could allow the brain to communicate with, like, a device or something, like bypassing the nerves that maybe aren't working.
Exactly.
Okay.
Think of it this way. So if your eyes or the optic nerves, right, are damaged, it's like losing the cable that carries the visual information to your brain.
Okay.
But the visual cortex itself, like the part of the brain that actually processes those signals and lets us see, that might still be perfectly capable of functioning.
Okay, so Blindsight is like creating a new pathway, basically.
Precisely. It's really fascinating. There's a comment in this Reddit thread that I think is a really important distinction that we should touch on. Cogsworth mentions that Blindsight is vision restoration without user intervention. So essentially, I mean, this raises the question, right? Like, is restoring sight for someone who was once sighted different from doing so for someone who has been blind from birth?
That's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
Like, is the brain, like, even able to, does it know what to do with that information if it's never, like, seen before?
Right.
I mean, that's just, it's wild to think about.
It is.
Like, are we talking about, like, if you've never seen the color blue, can you even, is your brain even going to process that information?
Right. Like, imagine trying to explain the concept of color to someone who had never experienced it.
Right.
It makes you wonder, like, how much of our perception is based on pre-existing neural pathways, you know, and experiences that we've had.
Yeah. And this is where it feels like, are we even stepping into, like, are we getting ahead of ourselves
Yeah.
with all this? Because Musk has made some pretty, like, out there claims
He has not been shy.
about what this could do. Like, he's talking about low resolution, like, Atari graphics at first, but then surpassing natural vision,
Right.
being able to see infrared and ultraviolet. Like, he's really thrown it all out there. I think he even threw in a Geordie LaForge comparison at some point. I don't know if you saw that.
Of course he did. Got to make it, got to grab the attention.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it worked. A couple of users in that Reddit thread that you sent over specifically mentioned those, like the Atari graphics and the infrared ultraviolet comments.
Okay, so he's getting the attention, but, I mean, should we be taking this with a grain of salt? Like, is any of that even realistic?
I think it's important to, you know, to ground this in what we know.
Okay.
Like existing visual prosthetics, and I'm not saying those are anywhere near as complex or advanced as what Neuralink is proposing.
Yes, sure.
But they can already provide a limited form of artificial sight.
Okay.
Very, very low resolution, black and white images. So the idea of it starting out, you know, that the sort of like Atari graphics comparison isn't entirely outlandish.
So it's like a starting point, but then it's like, how much better can it really get?
Yeah. I guess that's the $1 million question, isn't it?
Right.
Because the visual cortex is so incredibly complex.
Yeah.
To replicate the fidelity of our natural vision.
Right. Let alone surpass it. With infrared or ultraviolet perception, that would require a level of understanding of the brain that, frankly, we are nowhere near achieving right now.
So maybe let's hold off on the superhuman vision claims for now.
I think that's always good advice with a lot of these things. Temper your expectations a bit.
Okay. But I mean, it does feel like even if it achieves a fraction of what's being suggested here,
Yeah.
this could be completely revolutionary for people who've lost their vision.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes this technology, and really just the whole field in general, so compelling,
Yeah.
is that potential to really, radically improve lives. But it's important to remember it's still incredibly early days.
Yeah. Are we all getting these brain implants next week? Is that what's happening? I don't think so. Although it would be pretty wild if we were. No, this is, widespread use is likely years, if not decades away.
So what should people even be looking for at this point?
I think it's important to follow the development closely. Pay attention to future FDA approvals, clinical trial results, and importantly, independent research as well.
That's a good point, not just what's coming out of,
Right.
the company itself.
Because they're gonna hike it up.
Right.
That's their job.
Yeah.
But look for that independent verification.
Okay. This has been really interesting. Any kind of final thoughts as we wrap up this deep dive on Blindsight?
I think it's important for people to remember that this research, it has implications far beyond just restoring sight.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
This could lead to treatments for a whole range of neurological conditions. I mean, we're talking about Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, traumatic brain injuries. I mean, the potential here is really huge.
So while we're all waiting for our Geordie LaForge vision,
Right.
there's actually a lot to be, excited and hopeful for in terms of what this technology could do.
Absolutely. And I think maybe that's the biggest takeaway from all of this. Neuralink is really pushing the boundaries of what we thought was possible.
It's true.
And it's a field, it's an area of research that's it's full of potential, not just in terms of the advancements, but the questions that it raises.
Yeah. And questions I'm sure we will continue to have
Exactly.
as this all, develops. Well, I really appreciate you breaking it all down. It's been really interesting to kind of go on this journey with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always fun to kind of dive into these topics.
Yeah, for sure. And for you listening, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Neuralink and, really kind of the future of neurotechnology. Until next time.